Apple recently entered the arena through a partnership with Goldman Sachs, and immediately many people said that this was going to be the SoFi killer. And yet, this very week, Apple threw in the towel on that partnership with Goldman Sachs, who was bleeding money from this deal. And this very same week, SoFi reported some of the highest levels of short interest that they've seen throughout the entire year. So, what's going on behind the scenes? Let's talk about it. Okay, so I am recording this on Thursday night because I can't record it on Friday. I won't be available. As of tonight, the SoFi stock is up over 6% on the first 4 trading days of the week since Monday. I hope that there's no major news on Friday, but if there is, it won't be in this video. This will be the first 4 days of the week, and trust me, there's plenty of news to talk about in just those first 4 days. If you're new to this series, I recap some of the weekly news on SoFi every week, and unfortunately I won't be at SoFi Weekly later tonight, so I'll share some deeper thoughts in this video on some of these news pieces. Starting off the week, Cathie Wood bought more SoFi stock on Monday, and then she went and double dipped and bought again on Wednesday. So it seems as though she is starting to accumulate heavier in her ARK-F FinTech Innovation Fund, which picked up 252,000 shares of SoFi on Monday, and around that time, their total SoFi shares hovered around 1.26 million, so this represented a 19% increase in her position. 2 days later, the same fund purchased another 200,000 shares, bringing her total up to 1.5 million shares held, and SoFi comprises about 1.1% of the total ARK-F fund, so it's still very, very small in relation to some of her other positions in that same fund. Overall, I would say it's good to see her buying, although not the biggest deal in the world. We should just treat her like any other fund manager out there who's buying the stock, who we don't really cover news on, but we cover news on Cathie Wood because she is sort of that poster child for growth stocks, right? Regardless, good news, but not the biggest news in the world. In other news, Jim Cramer was asked about SoFi stock on Monday, and you'll be pleased to know that he remains bullish on the stock, saying that he is still long. I mean, Jim Cramer and Anthony Noto are personal friends of a long time, so I'm not surprised. He said, remember, this stock is up substantially from where it was in the spring. I think Noto's doing a great job. I remain a buyer. Now, personal feelings aside for Jim Cramer, I agree with everything that he said in that statement. So definitely good to see on that front, although I don't know how the stock is going to react. So far, so good. However, one of the most interesting pieces of news this week, posted by Michael Rowland on Tuesday, was around the SoFi short interest being among the highest level it's been so far in 2023. The only other time SoFi had more shorted shares was back in June, when they reported 132 million shares sold short on June 15th. And we know what happened right after in the next month that followed. As of the latest reporting on November 15th, the shares sold short were over 130 million shares. And if we scroll back through 2023, we can see that the short interest throughout the year has progressively increased as the year has gone by. I believe these 130 million shares represent around a 14% short interest of their shares outstanding. This is straight from the NASDAQ website, and as Michael highlights in his post, GAAP profitability is around the corner. It's coming soon, which is really interesting considering this setup where you have an increasingly high short percentage and you have this big catalyst that's coming up that a lot of people are looking towards. Like I said, the last time this happened was in June, and SoFi had a great run up into Q2 earnings on July 31st. This also tells a story, I think, with regards to the negative sentiment out there from both a news and an analyst perspective. In fact, since we're on the topic of analyst sentiment, Chris Hager pointed out earlier this week that the analyst from Compass Point once again reiterated his sell rating on SoFi. This analyst, Giuliano Bologna, had a price target of $5 that, he just went ahead and reiterated for no material reason whatsoever. There was no fundamental change in the company. Normally, analysts adjust price targets when they receive new information or when accounting for new metrics or numbers that can change their forecasting. But this gentleman went ahead and did it just 11 business days after the initial reporting. I think Chris pointed it out best in his post, saying, quote, "Not sure what changed in the last 15 days that makes this company worth $1 billion less than it was 2 weeks ago. It is what it is for some of these analysts, especially on the short side. We see Wedbush pretty much reiterating their price target of $3, I think it is now, every couple of weeks. Compass Point seems to be doing the same. I'm not really surprised. It's a little silly at times. Of course, in the comments, people are going to talk about manipulation, and there's all kinds of negative sentiment and news pieces. And this is all what I'm talking about when I'm mentioning the high short interest. It always hovers around this negative sentiment that is prevailing the narrative around the stock in general. It seems like a lot of people are wanting to keep the stock down for as long as they can, and that's fine by me because I'm just following the business fundamentals, the business execution, and the business catalysts that they have coming up. One piece of SoFi specific news, however, that was released earlier this week that could be perceived by the market as negative, but in reality is an absolute nothing burger, is the fact that SoFi is exiting their crypto business and they're partnering with blockchain.com for the user transition. Now, if you've been following this channel, you knew that this was coming. We've been talking about this for the past 2 weeks because this was leaked from a rumors perspective from multiple different sources, and this is likely a direct result of the regulatory pressures that SoFi has been seeing per their banking charter regulations that they have to follow. They can't be in crypto and also be a chartered bank. The company will end their crypto services on December 19th, and there's not going to be any new crypto accounts that are created after that fact. SoFi previously offered around 20 different cryptocurrencies, and soon all of that is going to be migrated over to blockchain. Now, the first question you should be asking yourself is, well, how bad is this really? And the answer is a little bit nuanced, right? The fact of the matter is that if you look at it from a revenue perspective, it's not bad at all, as SoFi's entire brokerage section, this includes their trading aspects as well, not just crypto, their entire brokerage business was 1% of their total revenue. I think it brought in like $6 million in terms of revenue, which is negligible. And within that $6 million of their brokerage fee, the majority of it was around equity and around options in general. Their crypto offerings as a percentage of their total brokerage was less than half, meaning that probably this entire crypto business for SoFi was bringing in like 2 million, maybe 3 million. Let's even say 4 million to like go absolutely crazy if it was a majority of their business. It's still less than 1% of their revenue. Less than 1%. Now, of course, the reason why I say it's nuanced is because the negative perception is more from an intangible perspective around their marketing aspects, around them being a one-stop shop, around them being just a branding aspect, a marketing aspect for them to be offering all of these different products, right? Like if SoFi took down home loans, for example, the revenue impact wouldn't be that huge, but of course they couldn't be advertising this many offerings in their ecosystem, in their suite. And like I've said in the past, I think that the value of an ecosystem is directly attributable to how many different nodes there are in that ecosystem in general. And so crypto is one of the things that, yeah, it could be highly in demand, it could be their least used product, but just the fact that they have it still is a positive for the company because the company's value proposition is primarily around them as an ecosystem. And so, I think that while it is absolutely nothing from a revenue perspective, less than 1% of their revenue in the grand scheme of things, I do think that there is a negative brand perception around them removing crypto. Now, the flip side of that would be that one could argue that it is a positive brand perception because they're seen as a more serious financial institution, the likes of JP Morgan and Wells Fargo and Citibank and Bank of America, and less so around, a crypto brokerage, which maybe has, the perception that they have more scams, the perception that they're less serious, so on and so forth. And so you could really go both ways in terms of how you perceive this news. Of course, the bears are going to, cherry pick whatever they want in terms of their perception. So I'm just trying to present all of the avenues of, the schools of thought of how people can take this news. But that's not the main piece of news that came out this week. The main piece of news is around Apple and Goldman Sachs. Apple is ending their credit partnership with Goldman Sachs. Apple proposed to terminate its credit card partnership, impacting their joint card and their savings account ventures. Now, this isn't happening immediately. Apple planned to exit this agreement in about 12 to 15 months. And this is really a significant shift, right? Because if you'll remember, Apple and Goldman entered this partnership back in 2019. This was a 10-year partnership, which would extend to 2029. And essentially how I'm understanding it is less than halfway through in 2023, they're throwing in the towel on that partnership. Now, Goldman Sachs is facing substantial losses in consumer lending. They initiated discussions to offload this partnership earlier in the year. We talked about this earlier in the year on the SoFi Weekly podcast because Goldman basically said, yeah, we're probably going to end this partnership. And I believe even earlier this year, there were some rumors around Apple potentially being in talks with Amex, although I'm not quite sure that anything was finalized. I don't think so because Apple still at this point has to find another partner. The point is that earlier this year, the reason why Goldman was hinting at this partnership ending was because they lost over $1 billion last year due to this Apple partnership. Insane amount of losses trying to support the absolute behemoth that is the Apple ecosystem. Of course, I think it makes sense for Goldman because they're losing a ton of money trying to support Apple. I think, though, however, that in the fine print of the clauses, that if Goldman were to terminate the contract, they would have to line up another supplier for Apple, although I'm not sure how that might work. Nevertheless, Apple has significant runway. They have 12 to 15 months to essentially find another partner in the space. If they can't find another partner, the high yield savings account will also be discontinued. But I personally think that Amex can be a potential partner. Seemingly, Amex might have the infrastructure. They might also have the tech expertise to support Apple's business. But it's going to be really difficult for Apple to find a partner because they're just gigantic, right? Now, just to share some of my thoughts, on the SoFi Weekly podcast, we've had many conversations around this. When Apple first partnered with Goldman, we also talked about it earlier this year when Goldman was hinting at that partnership not being as strong through rumors, and obviously this week when they basically threw in the towel. There's a couple of stances, I think, on this one that you can take as well. The first is to say that, yeah, obviously Apple leaving the space leaves more of that pie for SoFi to win those customers. And that's just a first order effect, one thing leads to another type of conclusion that you can make. I think the more nuanced stance is that Apple being in that space where SoFi plays in validates SoFi. And it also not only brings awareness, but it also brings entire cohorts of people who can onboard onto the Apple ecosystem first, and then afterwards they can start looking at high APY solutions and then go jumping from Apple onto SoFi. I think both of these stances could be true at the same time, depending on the cohort of people. I think that the market will take it as a positive news for SoFi, just looking at the first order effect of, hey, we had a huge competitor who was, people thought would kill SoFi, now leave the space. So SoFi is going to benefit. Although I don't think it's that black and white, right? I think time is going to tell whether Apple will find another large major partner, in which case we'll be right back here to square one, or whether they're going to be forced to leave the space altogether. My guess is that it's going to be Amex. I also think that somebody like a Warren Buffett, for example, can broker a deal. Warren has Apple as his largest position. He has Bank of America and Amex, like both in his top 5 positions. And it goes without saying that he would be a massively interested party in this happening, as he's very connected in that banking space. I'm not sure. I do think it's going to be Amex, though. I think that is going to be in talks soon. Either way, it remains to be seen. Overall, however, over this past week, I've seen less news around the macro in general. The fear-greed index was moving towards the greed aspect, maybe even inching on extreme greed. We could definitely have a strong pullback. Obviously this is all good as it seems that these names are recovering. Remember, SoFi management is going to be holding a shareholder Q&A on Monday, December 4th. I'll be doing my best to live stream that event. So make sure you're tuned in for that on Monday. But for right now, this is the Fundamentals Investing Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.